Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Boost Your Pest Control Program for Apples and Pears, presented by Valent USA, which develops and markets products that advance sustainable agriculture, protect crops, enhance crop yields, and improve food quality. I'm Larry Elwood, the custom content editor for Meister Media Worldwide, the publisher of American Fruit Grower Magazine, and I'll be moderating the webinar. Are aphids, scales, leaf rollers, cuddling moths, persilla, and more causing ongoing challenges in your apple and pear orchards? If so, today you will hear about the latest technologies to battle these pests. Our speakers will also touch on best practices for integrated pest management to help avoid resistance for a more sustainable production. In addition, you'll hear how Valent's SynStar insecticide brings two effective modes of action for long-lasting control of the previously mentioned soft-bodied insects. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our three speakers. Allison Woolston is the Product Development Manager for Insecticides at Valent USA. She is a graduate of the University of Kentucky, where she earned a bachelor's degree in agricultural biotechnology, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she earned a master's degree in entomology. For almost 15 years, Eric Ott has served in the role of field market development specialist for Valent USA. Prior to his career at Valent, Ott was a researcher at Michigan State University. He earned both his bachelor's degree in agronomy and a master's degree in weed science from Purdue University. Also speaking is Greg Clark, a senior field market development specialist for Valent USA. He has master's and doctorate degrees in plant pathology from Penn State University and has worked for Abbott Laboratories and then the Valent Group of companies for 30 years. Now I'm going to turn it over to Allison to begin the webinar. Allison, welcome.
Thank you, Larry, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for the very lovely introduction. And as Larry mentioned, I am an entomologist, so I am super excited about today's topic because we're going to talk all about insects. So we've kind of grouped them into different categories. We'll be discussing soft-bodied insects, which are a lot of our aphids, Scilla, San Jose scale. We'll go into the weevils of plum curculio, and then our Lepidoptera of leaf rollers, oriental fruit moth, and codling moth. So in this table, we're going to be using this throughout the presentation to just discuss some of the Valent brands that we have, and then along the left-hand side, along the top are the fruit timings by tree phenology, and then within the cells, those talk about the insects that those different insecticides control at that timing. So we'll be using this as a resource for each of the topics that we're discussing. So up next, we're going to be talking about the soft-bodied insects. So some of these are our aphids. And apple aphids, they have a life cycle where they basically, some of them can overwinter as eggs, and then they give live birth. They're primarily females, and they just keep going and going and going and cycling through that life cycle dependent on temperature. For woolly apple aphid, these are amazing little creatures. You can see this, the picture down at the lower right-hand corner. It's just this cottony white, very noticeable in your orchards. And they cause a lot of problems, and they are very challenging to control because of that cottony exterior. It's also comprised of wax, and it's hard for a lot of products to penetrate into that waxy cuticle. They feed on both the tree canopy, which you'll see throughout the summer months, and then they can also go down into the roots and form galls on the roots. This can impact the tree, stunting it, and in severe infestations, even weaken to kill the tree. When they move up into the upper canopy, they also produce honeydew, which are the deposits after they've eaten the plant sap, and they deposit that can drip onto the fruit and cause russet and black city mold to grow. We've also got green apple aphid and rosy apple aphids, and these also feed on the leaves, and they'll start to, you'll notice them by like these cupped leaves that form, and they'll be on the inside. And they also cause a lot of honeydew that trips onto the fruit that causes russet. And they can reduce productivity of your trees and can really damage small trees because they impact those terminal shoots and you don't get good growth and tree structure. So how do you scout for aphids? This is one of my, well, I'm going to say this probably about each insect, but it's one of my favorite things. You're just walking through the apple orchard. You begin monitoring around late May to early June, so we're almost getting to that point where the aphids start to become active and visible. And you're looking for the shoots. You'll see here this apple aphid, rosy apple aphid colony where I've unrolled the leaf and it was super crinkled, and then all the little aphids are right in there. The picture on the right is, you can see the white puffy cotton. That is a noticeable woolly apple aphid. And then they start to drip down on this picture where you've got the apples and the black residue. That's where the honeydew has dripped onto the fruit, and just basically it could russet that fruit if left on there for too long. So you look for all these other things. You could also look for ants. Ants are a huge indicator for a lot of soft-bodied insects because ants feed on that honeydew. And so if you see ants, you'll probably eventually find an aphid or even a mealybug. So how can we manage aphids? Well, first you need to gauge what your treatment threshold is versus are you willing to allow a little bit of aphid for some of your beneficial insects to feed upon. And so it's kind of a balancing act between those two. If you want natural enemies, you have to have a little bit of food for them, and that could be aphids. You still want to let your aphids get too far out of control. So it's kind of an equilibrium that you're trying to reach within your orchard. For some insecticides, they do flare aphids or other secondary pests, so be on the lookout. If you use, some broad spectrum, some type of codling moth materials, they can have impacts on aphids later in the season. And so for timeline of when you treat aphids, for rosy apple aphid, you start around 1/2 inch green and go to first cover sprays. For green apple aphid, 1/2 inch green to petal fall, and then even throughout the end of the year. For Senstar insecticide, which works on all of these aphids, it's any time after petal fall. And then for woolly apple aphid, it's usually like the 4th and 7th cover sprays or when noticed within the orchard. And Senstar has really good efficacy on woolly apple aphid, which we'll show some data slides here in a couple. So you've got options for aphid activity. You just need to make the management decision of, are there other pests that you're targeting? What is your, what kind of compounds do you like to use? If you are more eastern coast where you've got a lot of different insect pests all at one time, you can look to broad spectrum insecticides like Asana and Belay. You can see here where aphids are boxed in a white box throughout this table. You've also got some esteem activity if you're going after some of the other pests. Esteem alone does have aphid activity. If you're in a organic situation, we have Pyganic, which also has aphid activity. Senstar, which is a combination of Esteem and Spirotetramat, it has aphid activity, and especially woolly apple aphid activity. So it does really good on that. And if we go to this graph of efficacy, we've got the untreated, so we have quite a lot of aphids in this population. And so looking at Lorsban, our standard old Lorsban, you can see there's a bit of a reduction. Then we've got the combination in green, the different products, Esteem in green, and it has some activity. Ultor, and then Senstar in the blue, which is a combination of the previous two brands, Esteem and Ultor. And you can see that it just picks up that many more aphids. Up next is one of my favorite insects, Pearsilla. I live out in Oregon, and we produce a lot of pears. What happens is these little nymphs start to feed on the leaves and produce mass amounts of honeydew, which you can see here dripping from this leaf terminal. This drips down onto the fruit, which you can see in the bottom middle picture. And then on the far right, if those honeydews stay on the fruit long enough, black city mold grows on it, and then it russets the pear. So what we're doing for the Pearsilla life cycle. So winter form adults are moving out of the orchard, usually very like February-ish here on the west, and they start to lay eggs as the buds start to swell. And those little eggs, they're kind of like orangish macaroni and cheese color. They're individually laid at first, and then they start to stitch them. And so they're all laid in a row that looks like little stitches. And that's when we really want to start our pre-bloom programs. Those little eggs hatch into first instar nymphs and second instar nymphs, and those are the primary stages where you really want to target these applications. They're feeding on the phloem. All of these stages feed on the phloem, and they're all producing that honeydew, which can russet the fruit. Pears are very sensitive to this feeding. You start to see the leaf burn where it looks really scorched, and then the leaves will actually start to drop from the tree. So how to scout for Pearsilla? So we usually start early to mid-February. Mid-February, right around Valentine's Day, you can think, oh, I love people and I love Pearsilla. That's usually around the first time when we start to see eggs. You look on those spurs and for any egg activity. Some of our extension agents publish when the females are able to lay eggs. We monitor adults by doing beating tray samples, which is just a white cloth and you tap the limb and the adults fall down and then you count them. You can look for when the trees start to flush out and you get all that new growth. The Pearsilla love feeding on that new growth. So as you run when you go through the season and you get all those terminal shoots, you can run your hand along that terminal shoot upwards, and if your hand comes off sticky, you've probably got Pearsilla on there. And it's just a quick way to look for them without having to actually look for them. So management solutions for Pearsilla. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. We have a lot of opinions on how to manage Pearsilla, but basically a thorough pre-bloom program is essential. All the stages are not overlapping, so you really can get effective control and reduce that population before it gets going and blown up. You also want to rotate active ingredients, and Pearsilla is known to develop resistance easily, so rotate those, rotate. Just don't rotate the brand name, but also the actual mode of action. You can also make the tree surface undesirable. Pearsilla are very sensitive about laying their eggs. If you've got kaolin or oil or anything on the tree, they tend to not want to lay their eggs on that. We have a lot of beneficial insects that like to feed on Pearsilla, but you have to balance that because if you let your Scilla get out of control, you have a lot of honeydew issues. So that is a true balancing act. Over the past few years, we've been evaluating fruit washes before harvest, whether it be with water or insecticidal soap, just to get some of that honeydew residue off. And then the primary timelines that I like for treating Pearsilla are delayed dormant, targeting those newly laid eggs as they're hatching into first instars. My favorite product for that is Esteem 35WP. And then as we move into the season post-petal fall, again targeting immatures with our new insecticide, Senstar. So again, we're back to this chart of what insecticides we have. As you can see along the middle here is Esteem. We've got all the different timings for Pearsilla whenever they may pop up in your orchard. And then we have Senstar insecticide near the bottom here from petal fall until mid-fruit development. But you have to watch your PHIs as we have a 45-day PHI. So now I'm going to turn it over to Greg Clark, and he's going to talk about our next insect pest.
Thanks, Allison. So this is San Jose scale. I think it's another one of your favorites, right, Allison?
Yes,
so
I love it.
Most times, most problems with San Jose scale generally are first noticed when fruit with these characteristic symptoms, these red dots, appear in bins at harvest. So that's generally when folks first know that they've got a problem. If you do see these, it's good to maybe identify that area of the orchard where these are, because scale don't move very quickly, so you might be able to do some special targeting of these pests if they occur in a hot spot in your orchard. But let's look at the life cycle here. There are probably 2 generations per year in most apple production sites, but the one generation referred to here is really the first generation, which is effectively the only generation that we target for control. So this insect overwinters in the black cap stage that's depicted in that diagram in the lower right-hand side. And then there's the typical sequence of mating and egg laying and things resulting in the crawler stage. These are the very mobile phase of this insect, and they're moving around until they also become covered with a waxy covering and are more difficult to control with insecticides. But San Jose scale cause their damage by sucking the juices out of twigs or branches, and like I said, the damage to the fruit is very characteristic. Really severe infestations can kill limbs. If you have especially young branches that have heavy populations, if you pull back the bark, there's generally a characteristic red or crimson kind of color. These insects are injecting a type of toxin that really will result in tree death if not checked. Back in the early 1900s, when this insect made its way to the eastern United States, I've seen reports of something like 1/3 of the trees were lost in Pennsylvania until they found a way to manage this pest. So it can be very, very serious. So picking up on the theme of scouting, as I mentioned, be on the lookout for spotted fruit in the bins, but you can also be looking for them on the bark in older and younger trees. Be on the lookout for those. In terms of management solutions, thinking back to the life cycle, really this delayed dormant to pink area or timing is the timing to get to the overwintering scale. So that's the best opportunity to get to them. And here, a really good option would be Esteem 35WP insect growth regulator, used either alone or in combination with some sort of dormant oil. Can be a very effective first step in controlling this pest. The next window available for control is at petal fall, as the crawlers start moving around. Here again would be a great time for your first or second application of Esteem. Senstar would also be a good option here, and as Allison has already said, this is a combination of Esteem and Spirotetramat. And again, depending on your region, an addition of a horticultural mineral oil might be appropriate. So these are the 2 windows of management of this pest: that delayed dormant to pink stage, and then at petal fall for the crawlers. Whoops, too far. All right, so back to this the scheme for scale, as Allison has pointed out, just look for the scale crawlers being, or adults being highlighted here for belay and the steam, and you can see where that fits into this general pest management timeline for scale. Let's look at a little bit of data related to Esteem and Senstar. In this slide, it compares the various timings of Esteem to control scale. So there on the bottom left, there's the delayed dormant timing of Esteem, then pink timing, then petal fall, and then a degree day based timing, all compared to the standard Lorsban delayed dormant spray. And you can see Esteem doing a great job here in managing this pest, and this depicts also a really great flexibility in timing for Esteem. So keep that in mind if this is a problem pest for you. This slide compares several products for the control of the crawler stage. So these would have been petal fall applications of either Belay, Senstar, or Movento. And you can see in terms of producing clean fruit at harvest, all three of those products are doing a good job in managing this pest. So that's it for San Jose scale. I'll turn it over to Eric now.
Thank you, Greg. We'll move into the beetles and weevils. We'll be focusing in on the plum curculio. Plum curculio is a damaging weevil pest in apples, pears, and stone fruit, especially in eastern North America. Plum curculio damage, as you can see, are crescent-shaped scars left by egg-laying activities. These scars can last through the season, as seen in the photo on the right, and reduce marketability. Plum curculio overwinter as adults in leaf litter near orchards. Adult plum curculio females start egg laying around the petal fall timing, making the crescent-shaped slit in the fruit. Adults can also feed on buds, flowers, and young fruit as well. After the egg is laid and hatches, the larvae begin to feed on fruit. Plum curculio larvae cannot complete its life cycle in a growing fruit, at least apples and pears. However, if the developing fruitlet falls on the ground, the larvae can continue to grow and then exit the fruit to pupate in the soil. The next generation of adults emerge in late summer and can feed on fruit, but usually do not reproduce until the following spring. Optimal scouting time starts at full bloom and goes through mid-June. Critical times for insecticide applications should be focused starting at petal fall timing through the first and second cover applications, depending on scouting. Several states have plum curculio monitoring programs that help determine timely insecticide application. In apples, some plum curculio management options include Belay, Asana XL, and Danitol. In pears, Asana XL and Belay are management options. And as you've seen in other parts of the presentation, Belay here, starting at petal fall, as well as Asana and Danitol are management options, as you can see with the timing of the tree growth. And this is a graph with data from Michigan State, looking at the percent of damaged fruit at harvest. And you'll notice Belay at the 6 fluid ounce rate significantly reduced the number or the percentage of damaged fruit at harvest. So we'll move on to the Lepidoptera and internal feeders, and we'll start out with the leaf rollers. Well, while there are several different species of leaf rollers, all leaf roller pest species in apples and pears cause the same damage. Leaf damage, leaf feeding, and various types of fruit damage, as you can see from all these photos. I'll start out with discussing the oblique banded leaf roller. I will use the acronym OBLR the rest of the presentation. The OBLR moth can be identified by the oblique brown bands on the upper wings, as you can see in the upper photo. The larval stage is the crop damaging life stage of this pest, which is the same for all of the leaf roller pests, which we will discuss today. OBLR overwinters as second or third instar larvae, feed on leaves, shoots, and fruits of the apple and pear. This pest has 1 to 2 generations per year, with adult females laying eggs on the upper surface of leaves. Since OBLR can have up to 2 generations, scouting at 2 different times of the year are important. For the overwintering generation, scouting between tight cluster and petal fall is key, and then again between June and August for the next generation. Moving on to Pandemus leaf roller. As you can see, the adult moth is very similar looking to OBLR. However, overall, Pandemus moths have an overall lighter color and much smaller than OBLR. Pandemus leaf roller larvae are typically lighter in color compared to the OBLR. Similar to OBLR, Pandemus leaf rollers overwinter as larvae and have 1 to 2 generations per year, feed on leaves, shoots, and fruits, and adult females lay eggs on the upper surface of the leaves. Scouting time is similar to OBLR as well, tight cluster to pink, and then again that June to August time frame. Next is the red-banded leaf roller. This leaf roller is primarily found in eastern North America. The adult female moths have a red band, whereas the adult male moths band is darker and sometimes almost black. This pest has 2 generations per year and overwinters as a pupae. Adult females lay eggs on the upper surface of leaves, and scouting time is similar to OBLR and the Pandemus leaf roller. The last 2 leaf rollers I will be discussing, I will combine since they have similar life cycles, the fruit tree leaf roller and the European leaf roller. Both of these leaf rollers overwinter as eggs, and the larvae feed on the leaves, shoots, and fruits and have 1 generation. Adult female moths lay eggs on the trunk or tree limbs where they overwinter. Scouting time for these 2 leaf roller pests is between 1/4 inch green to second cover. Monitoring these pests is important for timely management of these leaf rollers. Mating disruption is available for several of these leaf roller species as well. Biological insecticides of dipel and Zentari are excellent choices for targeting these lepidopteran pests. Other leaf roller management options include Pyganic, Esteem, Belay, Asana, and Danitol. And you'll see that, as I mentioned, several of these insect pests are on this list here after the petal fall timing. So with that, I will pass it over back to Greg.
Thanks, Eric. So I'll pick it up with Oriental fruit moth. Oriental fruit moth is another one of these exotic pests. It's a very severe pest of stone fruit, basically anywhere stone fruit are grown. And on pome fruit too, more in the east than the west, from what I understand. The shoot damage is relatively minor, and you can see the flagging that's very typical in peaches there on the lower right-hand side. But this is a serious direct pest of fruit, an internal feeder, different from the kinds of symptoms and damage that Eric was just talking about. These larvae, after hatching, pretty much go directly into the fruit, either through the calyx end or the stem end. So very little opportunity to get them with insecticides in that time frame. The life cycle is that they overwinter as larvae in these silken cocoons and then pupate and emerge as adults in April. There's 3 to 4 generations per year, generally speaking. So the management of Oriental fruit moth very much centers around monitoring first with pheromone traps and trying to establish a biofix. So when you have trapped 2 or more moths per trap, and then using regionally developed degree day tables to estimate the first and second generations, the peaks of those. And the idea is to then time your sprays to coincide with those generations. So in that graph to the right, what you're seeing there is the biofix for Oriental fruit moth over several different years from Penn State. I think this is at the Biglerville site. So you can see in generally a very large first generation and then a second hump of the second generation. In terms of management of this pest, pheromone disruption can be very effective when used, especially on large acreage. 5 to 10 acres or more is where this can be an effective strategy. There are good products that combine pheromones of both Oriental fruit moth and codling moth, which Allison will talk about next. So pheromone disruption can be a really good strategy for this. There are also broad spectrum insecticides that could be used here. So Belay would be a good choice, or Danitol to manage Oriental fruit moth. So as we've done, here's the Oriental fruit moth and how it fits into this pest management timeline scheme. Asana, Belay, or Danitol would be good choices along these lines. So with that, I'll turn it back to Allison.
Thank you, Greg. All right, our final insect that we're going to be talking about today is codling moth. And codling moth is across the U.S., across the globe. And so in this first picture of a leaf, there's a tiny little white dot, and that is a codling moth egg. As your nerdy entomologist, of course, I have pictures of codling moth eggs. And so what they do is they come in, a lot of times they'll go through the calyx end because it's fairly open, especially for pears. They love to burrow in when 2 fruit are resting next to each other, and they'll come in through the side. They can also come in through the stem, and they'll go straight for the seeds, and then they'll start to push their frass out the frass hole and just make an overall mess. So here in the middle picture, we have a codling moth larva that's reached the center of the apple, and then on the far right, we have a damaged pear from codling moth, and you can see all the frass lingering out here on the outside. So codling moth, the moths begin flying this time of year. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, welcome to spring. We finally had some nice days. Temperatures over 55 degrees, so those moths will start flying. And local extension helps us to determine a biofix of when to start that degree day model and when to help us time specific applications. And so one of the things we can do is look to the model for different stages of when the codling moth is developing. One of the first stages we get to is 100 degree days, and that's when the adult moths are laying eggs. And we do have a compound called Esteem that can work at that timing, which if you recall, Greg presented its efficacy on San Jose scale at that time. So if you have multiple pests, that's a good option. For standard codling moth applications, we usually target around 200 to 250 degree days, which is about 3% egg hatch. So we're trying to coat the fruit. So as soon as those little neonates come out of the egg, the first chomp they take is some insecticide. And then here we have about 2 generations, sometime a partial 3rd generation. And so those take about 1,000, 1,200 degree days to go from one generation to the next. During harvest, they'll start to come out of the apples, and they'll burrow in the crevices of the tree trunk. And then also sometimes if they don't escape from the fruit and it drops, they'll drop to the orchard floor. So what are some calling moth management solutions that we can recommend? Again, mating disruption, trap counts, and using degree day models, very important and highly used across the U.S. Make sure to rotate active ingredients. There are a lot of brands. There's a lot of mode of action, but you have to rotate all of these types of things. You can also introduce things like virus, insect growth regulators, and as I said, target calling moth eggs at 100 degree days with a steam. If you've got pears, you're also picking up Pearsilla or San Jose scale or some other pests. It's a really good timing for multi-attack. Cultural practices, so mowing in the fall to make sure that if they're in any of those dropped apples or pears, they get chopped up so that they can't develop within that. Removing wooden bins or huge bin piles to make sure that the little diapausing larvae don't stay in or close to your orchard and then hatch into moths the next season. For the eastern U.S., you all like to use a lot of broad spectrum insecticides because you have so many more pests. As Greg said, oriental fruit moth. As Eric said, plum curculio. So we have broad spectrum insecticides like Danitol and Belay that can pick up all of those insects. A lot of problems are the adults stay in the top of the tree and like to fly around and lay their eggs up there. And some of our air blast sprayers aren't getting good enough coverage up there. So you really want to focus the target of your applications into the upper canopy and make sure you get good coverage and not just organic tops of your trees. So good coverage is always essential. So back to our table of products and timings. We've got Asana, Belay, and Danitol to use through fruit set to pre-harvest, and those can target, as you can see in these big boxes, a lot of different pests. If you're or in organic production, we have several options for you: Dipel, Dentari, which are our BT compounds, and Pyganic. They provide a lot of efficacy against the larvae for BT. If you're in conventional and looking for other modes of action, Dipel is also a good rotational partner to put with your conventional insecticides. It does very well in conventional programs. And then, as I've mentioned a couple of times, a steam at 100 degree days for calling moth can control the eggs, and which also, yes. Okay. So that's what we have for the majority of our insects. And now we'll just kind of go into the summary, and I'll open this up to Greg and Eric as they also have any comments. And we're going to go into some best management practices as we summarize here. Again, rotating to different modes of actions, not just brand names. Entomologists have a bit of a different philosophy where you hit one generation with one mode of action, and as you go into the next generation, hit it with a different mode of action. So these are things you might want to implement. Regularly scout for pests. These insects can go from in 1 week, and if temperatures are ideal, the populations can explode and get out of control. So you want to be on the early side with your applications and scout and monitor and use your best decisions on if you have natural enemies or do you need to make a treatment. A lot of people do release beneficial insects or have other crops like roses to encourage parasitoids or other types of trees to encourage natural enemies. These are techniques that you can use. You can also purchase natural enemies to release in your orchard, but don't buy the adults because they could just fly away. Always consult with your extension agents for local information. They can help you with biofix and trap counts and all those types of things. We like to emphasize to always read and follow the label for instructions. And always go to get the newest label. Don't ever just save them to your documents or things like that. Labels change very quickly and unannounced a lot of times. So always go back to whatever you use, like Agrian, CDMS, or even the manufacturer's website, and make sure that you've got the most recent and up-to-date label. And then finally, spray coverage is so essential, whether it's a contact insecticide or systemic. It enhances the product performance. And so as you can see here, those yellow cards are water-sensitive paper. The more blue it is, the better coverage you've got, because that's where water has hit it and means that you have a good coating. And as you can see, as you increase your speed, you get less and less blue dots. These are available at like your distributor sites or even on Amazon, and it's a really good way to just staple them to some leaves in your tree all the way up from eye level to the very tippy top. And you can see how what kind of coverage you're getting. You can do it from the outside of the tree to the inside of the tree and see if you're penetrating into the tree trunk, because a lot of our insect pests like to hide in those crevices. I'll go back real quick, Greg. Eric, did you have any other inputs for best management practices?
Not for me, Allison. Sounded good.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate I have my own trees, and yeah, the regular scouting for pests for me has been key on timing things. I have several different varieties and that bloom at different times, and realized that I need to be out there several times a day depending on how warm the temperatures are. So yeah, just knowing how regular scouting is important.
Thank you. In this presentation, we've talked a lot about natural enemies, and it's one of the things that we've focused on a lot across the U.S. Back about 20 years ago, let's not do math. A few years ago, we did a lot of bioassays with the universities looking at some of the most popular insecticides, which are listed here along the left, and some of our predominant natural enemies here along the top. And as you can see, green is good. The insecticides, let's look at Esteem, which is the next to last here. As we go across, green is good, means little or no impact to those beneficial insects from that insecticide. And as we get to yellow, those are modest effects or sublethal activity, and then red is a strong adverse effect. So Dariocarus, which is one of our Pears predators, earwigs, lacelings, all of those types of things, Esteem WP is very safe on those. And then finally, this is our last slide, just wrapping up with the Valent portfolio of insecticides with the pests in the little cells by the phenology of the tree. And so that's all I have. Greg, Eric, did you have any other comments?
Nope, not for me, Allison.
Likewise.
Okay, then we're going to throw it back to Larry, and I think we're going to move into the question round.
Okay, Allison, thank you very much. Greg, Eric, thank you. Excellent presentation. Very well done. We do have some questions. And again, I'd like to remind our audience that if you have a question, just type it in the question pane at the lower corner of your screen and click submit. And we will get to it. Okay. We have a question here for you, Allison. What recommendations do you have for organic pest control?
Well, for organic pest control, it helps to know the pest in the crop, but overall, we'll just make the assumption that it's everything in apples and pears. For codling moth, dipel, any of your BTs, Zentari is also a good rotational option. They're both BTs, but they have different Krytox proteins, so you can rotate those two. If you're just targeting general pests, Pyganic, I am also a huge proponent of horticultural mineral oil, and so just using oil a lot to basically suffocate a lot of those insect pests can be very beneficial. And then, of course, beneficial insects.
Right. Okay, Allison, thank you. Another question for you. As we transition away from lure span use, Allison, how do you see pest management changing?
Well, over the past 20 years, we have moved away slowly from organophosphates, which were these broad spectrum insecticides that took out a lot of different insects, and they had a huge slop factor where you could spray it almost any time and it would take everything out. As those organophosphates have moved away and we've gotten into more specific insecticides that are very targeted to a certain insect, we have to focus a lot more on timing and scouting and making those decisions of, is this a treatment threshold now? So we basically have to wait for our orchards to enter an equilibrium. I think a lot of secondary pests will flare up for a while until we either get the timings down or natural enemies come in and start to control them again. So it's a process, but it's worth it in the long run.
Okay, thank you. Eric, we have a question for you, sir. Are there any other key pests that we should consider for apples and pears? For example, invasive pests.
Yes. So, there's several that we weren't able to cover today that I thought about that I have problems with in my orchard. Apple maggot is one of those pests that usually target the redder apples, the ones that get red first. At least that's what occurs in my orchard. Typically, I use an Asana or a Belay or a Danitol in that situation. Leafhopper, whether that's most likely potato leafhopper, that's what I deal with. Usually that gets managed with some applications right around that early, either between petal fall and second cover. That can be a problem later as well. Some invasives that we didn't cover that are a problem are brown marmorated stink bug and spotted winged Drosophila, or not spotted winged Drosophila, spotted lanternfly, which is a newer pest here in the east. And for these invasive pests, pyrethroid like Danitol is a really good option for those. And I know there's other pests that we didn't cover, but those are the four that come to my mind that we didn't cover that are important.
Okay, thank you, Eric, very much.
Could we quickly include spider mites? It's not an insect, but we get a lot of two-spotted spider mites, European red mites, and we do have a miticide called Zeal that can take care of those as well.
Allison, any tank mix precautions that should be considered in general with insecticides?
You should always do jar tests if you've never applied that before or have any level of concern. ECs are typically, you want to show caution because they could be, if it gets hot or, pears are very sensitive. Some apple varieties are sensitive, so you want to make sure that you don't make that tank mix combination too hot. You also don't want to make mayonnaise in your tank, so make sure if you've got WDGs that you slowly soak them in water to make sure you make a good slurry before adding the oil in, or you could have tank mix issues. Other types of things, micronutrients, always be careful. Some of the water-soluble packets don't mix well with products like boron. And then if you've got really cold water, you want to make sure that you just take your time mixing all these things because cold water does make the mixing go slower.
Excellent points. Thank you, Allison. Greg, we have a question for you. What makes Senstar insecticide different from Movento insecticide?
So Senstar is a combination product that includes both pyriproxyfen, which is the active ingredient in Esteem, and spirotetramat, which is the active ingredient in Movento. And so Senstar brings these together, and so you sort of get the best of both worlds. Spirotetramat, of course, is known for being fully systemic, up and down in the plant, so you get good exposure to the insects or access to the insects that way. Esteem is well known for really good translaminar movement, so you can get to these insects wherever they are. Combining these two also helps to give better coverage to all the life stages, so you're affecting all of the life stages with this combination. You're not really expanding the pest spectrum, the different kinds of insects that you're controlling, but you're getting expanded life stage spectrum coverage. So that's the advantage that we see in bringing these two active ingredients together in Senstar.
Thank you, Greg. Allison, a couple more questions for you. Why is scouting so important, Allison?
Well, this kind of goes back to the organophosphate thing earlier, that there was such slop factor that you could just kind of spray the orchard with a Lorsban and there wouldn't be too much to pop up after that. So as we move into more specialized chemistries and don't use a calendar spray as much, the scouting becomes essential. And that also tells you your population amounts, if you're still kind of under a treatment threshold or when the populations start to flare. So I think it just helps you make better pest management decisions.
Okay, thank you. And Allison, is there a recommended MRL resource that we should consider?
For MRLs, you want to think about three things. One, the commodity, so the crop that you're wanting to know about. Two, the active ingredient that you are worried about. And then three, the country that you're planning to go to export. So it could be a country or a region like the EU or Codex or something like that. So you need those three pieces of information. And then you can go to, there's several websites. The one that I like to use is Bryant Christie Global, BC Global, and they publish all of the MRLs for all of our commodities and keep those updated. They are linked in with EPA, so they keep a tight connection for all of that information. And then other local resources are available. I know the Northwest Hort Council also publishes MRLs that you can look at for apples, pears, and cherries.
Okay. Thank you, Allison. Okay, well, that does it with the questions. Is there anything that anybody would like to add to close? Okay. I want to thank everybody for attending the webinar, and I want to thank Valent USA for presenting it. And thanks again to Allison Woolston, Eric Ott, and Greg Clark for providing an excellent overview on this topic. I want to thank everybody once again for joining us today. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to Valent USA for presenting this excellent webinar, and have a great day, everybody.